Hello, I'm Mark and I like to talk about British politics and yes, Brexit from an outside view. But don't worry, I know the UK from the inside as well. I indeed lived there in the past. But today we have to talk about Brexit again. Because from the EU's point of view, there should be opportunities for a limited re-intensification of bilateral relations after the elections that were passed now. But one thing is clear, reversing Brexit is not up for debate, at least not in the medium term, even for the Labour Party. Because Labour categorically rules out a return to the internal market or customs union, which wouldn't work anyway, but also to freedom of movement and any form of dynamic adoption of EU rules, which puts them quite in a corner. In addition to the goal of technical adjustments to the EU-UK trade agreement, for example in the veterinary field, Labour particularly emphasises its interest in increased cooperation with the EU in foreign and security policy. After the double elections that happened this summer, the EU and the United Kingdom have indeed the opportunity to deepen their foreign and security policy cooperation. In view of an increasingly confrontational European security order with an imperialist, expansive Russia, the global rivalries between the USA and China, and the possible return of Trump to the White House, EU and my home country Germany should have a great interest in seizing this opportunity. Whether and to what extent this can succeed depends on the mutual will to put geostrategic interests at the forefront in the negotiations instead of insisting on red lines. On the one hand, the political scope for action of the new Labour government is important. If, contrary to expectations, the party did not win a big majority, and I don't know that when I filmed this, then the new cooperation would remain limited. But after Labour's victory, it cannot be assumed in the medium term that Brexit itself or its central guardrails, no return to the internal market and the customs union, no form of mandatory adoption of EU law will be revised. The Tories in the opposition would also protest loudly and with the support of the conservative media against any rapprochement with the EU, especially since they are under pressure from the hard Brexiteers and ferocious Reform UK party on the issue. Starmer's previous positioning suggests that the scope of action of a Labour-led government towards the EU would at best allow for political rapprochement and better coordination, but hardly for reintegration. However, deepening cooperation in the largely separate special area of foreign and security policy could send a positive signal in the mutual interest and also open up scope for closer cooperation in other areas in the medium term. On the other hand, the EU should also show more flexibility, according to experts. During the Brexit negotiations, the mantra was that the United Kingdom should not benefit from special regulations in any area, but should be treated like any other third country, which I think is correct. Applied to foreign security and defense policy, this leads to the Galileo problem described by some experts, for example, to the exclusion of the British Army's industry from joint munitions procurement. The efforts made so far to involve London in European security issues in a structured manner, for example via the EPG, make little difference to the EU-UK relationship. Bilateral agreements with large member states remain more important in this case. And this formalistic view also has political reasons. Even without official voting rights, London would have more weight as an observer than at least 22 of the 27 EU members, given its importance in foreign and security policy as a non-member. And this, of course, breaks the logic that a non-member cannot have the advantages of EU membership. However, insisting on regular third country conditions for these formal reasons does not do justice to the interests of a geopolitical EU, according to experts, or the status of the UK in this area. Instead, experts say the EU should open itself up to integrating the UK into security issues in a structured manner within the framework of a security pact, as envisaged by Labour, via an individual model in accordance with the joint EU-UK strategic initiative. The core feature of this new model should be a UK-specific balance between obligations, flexibility, and mutual interests to be found in negotiations. The joint strategic initiative should be based on the principle of partnership, not reintegration. The level of cooperation would be between the EU institutions and the British government, but with strong participation from the EU member states, which continue to play the central role in the area of foreign security and defense policy. And last but not least, this initiative should be set up from the outset to complement and not compete with existing interrelationships, particularly with regard to NATO. Such a project would require a new institutional framework beyond the existing ad hoc cooperation. It could consist of three elements. First, regular strategic consultations should be introduced at the political level, such as those the EU maintains with other strategic partners in the form of third country dialogues, such as they have with the USA. And the EU should be represented there by the President of the Commission and the President of the European Council at the highest level, and the High Representative at the Foreign Minister level. And these consultations should take place at least once a year. And a good starting point for this would be at the end of 2024, after the US elections. At the working level, however, secondly, mixed working groups of EU institutions and representatives of the UK and EU member states on subject areas in which cooperation would be deepened, and that will be a good option there. And thirdly, London could be invited as a guest to selected parts of meetings of heads of state and government or EU foreign ministers, possibly together with accession candidates and or other partners. However, participation should always be selected and limited in order to remain at the partnership level. Legally, such an initiative could be linked to the existing Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, between the EU and the UK. The TCA is explicitly designed as a framework agreement that can be supplemented by further individual agreements in accordance with Article 2 of the TCA. These can also use and expand the common institutional framework, including the possibility of setting up specific working groups. The most important thing for a joint strategic initiative, however, are concrete political projects. And three subject areas are particularly suitable beyond regular foreign and security policy coordination. First of all, this would be better coordination on sanctions, supported by a mixed working group. There, both sides could benefit from improving the coordination of sanctions, which is partly carried out indirectly via the G7 or the EU, USA, UK, exchanging information and harmonizing the measures imposed without giving up mutual decision-making autonomy. And a second focus should be cooperation in defense and armaments policy. The EU has ambitions to make significant progress here in the upcoming legislative period, which in turn would be important for British industry. And a third potential focus could be climate foreign policy. The Labour Party wants to make climate protection the focus of British foreign policy, and the EU and UK have a common interest in linking their emissions trading and their CO2 compensation systems, which is now also planned in Great Britain, and representing them globally. But many other topics are also possible, such as support for Ukraine, cybersecurity, or energy policy. And my home country Germany could play a key role in the joint EU-UK strategic initiative. On the one hand, Berlin in particular has a vested interest in integrating London into European security and armaments cooperation. The German-British Defence Pact sought by Labour should not only be embedded in NATO and the G7 from the outset, but also in a security treaty between the EU and the UK. In the negotiations on PESCO or on the procurement of ammunition, for example, France pushed for the most restrictive conditions possible for third countries in the interests of European sovereignty, which came at the expense of British participation. Germany should work together with other partners to interpret Europe's sovereignty as pan-European as possible, with a flexible, in-depth and as comprehensive as possible integration of the United Kingdom, but always as a partnership. It must always be clear the UK, as long as the UK is not a member of the EU, it cannot have the benefits of membership. So everything that's moving closer must be on partnership level, like the EU has for a long time with the USA and others. There are regular meetings with the USA on a lot of issues as such, but that must be the one clear thing. And everything I talked about today still doesn't do anything in the cases of euro clearing or the British financial sector and their access to the EU, etc. That isn't the TCA as it is, as long as they stick with their regulations and not EU regulations. That will be out of the question. But everything I summed up in this video on the security and climate issues can be done in a partnership. Once again, partnership. Nothing will change the membership benefits that are not for third countries. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.